The 566th edition of the Four Corners podcast starts right now.
This is the Four Corners podcast.
And that could make a difference. Lawson at the buzzer. Got it! Maybe not. Ty Lawson wins it at the buzzer.
Deep three. And Green rips down the rebound in traffic. 4-on-1.
What a great job. What a terrific job in transition. I mean, you couldn't plan that any better as a coach.
Gets the roll. Here we go. Page has it. Carolina down one. 84-83. Page into the front court with 4 seconds. Page to the rim. Got it! He got it! 9/10 of a second to go. Inbounds. Washington gets it to Warren. His full court shot. No good. Marcus Page baby. Does it for the Tar Heels. Carolina wins it.
Don't force it if you're Goss.
Comes in. Blocked by Meeks. Buried up ahead to Jackson. And he tucks it down for the 5-point lead. Matthews off the mark. And this year the confetti is going to fall for North Carolina. They're not going to be denied this time. Inside 30 overall. Love, top of the key. Oh! Big time delivery.
Here are your hosts, Josh Marlowe and Anthony Pagnotta.
Hello and welcome into another live edition of the Four Corners podcast. We are powered by Carolina Electrical Services. Josh and Anthony coming at you live on a Sunday night. Quite a bit to talk about for Carolina basketball on Friday. The program officially released their non-conference schedule for the upcoming season. And last week, the NBA draft took place. Drake Powell got drafted. RJ Davis signed after going undrafted. We'll talk about both of those guys in just a little bit. But a fun edition of the show because when you get the non-conference schedule, it's kind of a reminder that we're kind of getting close to the preseason portion of the basketball season getting here. It's when you think about it in September, this team will be on the court in practice. And they'll be on the court, with some summer sessions here coming up as well. And I think this is a fun, unique, different look of a non-conference schedule. And we'll talk about that here in just a moment. Before we get to that, though, we start every edition of the pod, as we always do, with the pod thought of the day. We go to legendary Jets quarterback Joe Namath for today's pod thought. That thought is, quote, "To be a leader, you have to make people want to follow you. And nobody wants to follow someone who doesn't know where he's going," end quote. You go back to last year and the struggles that team, endured really from start to finish, but it really started in the non-conference season. One thing we talked about was there was a lack of vocal leadership that existed on last year's team. And some of that, went to the criticism of RJ Davis, a fifth-year player, a very decorated and accomplished player that some people thought, hey, he should have been more vocal, but that just wasn't who RJ Davis was and is. And at some point you have to accept that. But there was no doubt that the lack of a vocal leader really hindered last year's team. When you look at the team before that RJ Davis was on, that won 29 games and an ACC regular season title, was full of vocal leaders. Guys like Cormac Ryan, Harrison Ingram, 2 imports from the transfer portal. Armando Bacot, who was a fifth-year player at the time. We also talked about how maybe the non-conference schedule played a factor in that because Carolina got so beat up. They were preseason ranked inside the top 10. They were unranked by Thanksgiving and virtually never recovered from a poll standpoint. That maybe that played a role in it because no one felt confident enough to step up and lead because they weren't doing what they needed to do on the court and translate into wins. Maybe that's an excuse, maybe not. I do think it played a role in that. And as we'll talk about here in just a minute, I do think this non-conference schedule, will allow the leadership of this team that, yes, you want to be developing right now. You hope that when you take the court in September and October, that leadership is already there. But even if it's not, I think this non-conference schedule will allow leadership to cultivate on and off the court.
Yeah, I would think that it sets up like that. I think it's more of it's a schedule that is going to give you much more confidence as a team. You're going to look at this schedule and think, okay, there's opportunities for us to get ourselves right if we lose some of the bigger games that we have on our schedule. And don't get it wrong, this is still a non-conference schedule that provides a lot of tests for Carolina. It's one of the reasons that we like how it's really scheduled out, is because it still provides the tests that you need to be able to build yourself as a team for the postseason. But at the same time, it still gives you some of that leeway to really grow as a basketball team. And this team needs that, because you're talking about a team that has 9 different guys from last year. It might even be more than that, if I'm thinking right now. But I mean, on the surface, most of these guys are completely different. They don't know. They've never played with these guys before. And that's part of the reason why, people that are putting a lot into what we've seen here in the summer scrimmages against some of the alumni guys. I know that to me is just crazy. I know people want to, criticize and are looking for reasons, especially this offseason, to be negative about where the roster is at, where Hubert Davis has this group. But I think that ultimately it's going to take a while to really learn what exactly this group is made of, because you've got so many different pieces. So having this type of schedule, I think, lends well to them and will allow, those leaders to emerge. But most importantly, it'll just allow you to be a little bit more confident in yourself as you go into the conference portion of the regular season.
I do think it's fair to say, on the surface, we expect Seth Trimble to be a guy that is establishing himself right now as a leader. I think this was a guy that last year, you look at certain comments after certain games. I always will reference the Clemson game, but you go back to the end of season loss to Ole Miss. I thought there was a vocal leadership aspect to him that you could really appreciate. I think it's a big reason why he ultimately decided to come back, was that he waited his turn. He waited his time. We know he entered the portal, but then, rescinded that portal entry 2 years ago. But I do think that's a guy we can look at and say right now is going to be a leader for next year. And I do think, and you don't want to burden this guy with too much expectation, but with what we've seen from Caleb Wilson on social media, with the way he's talked with some fans, and we've seen some clips going viral from him at UNC basketball camp this week, I think that's another guy that I think we'll expect to have some sort of a leadership role. But 2 leaders is not enough. You're going to need at least maybe one more guy vocally. And so it'll be interesting to see who that guy emerges with the amount of transfers that have been imported. You would imagine it could be a guy from the transfer portal. It could be Luka Bogovac, the international pro that Carolina brought in. Could be a freshman alongside Caleb Wilson. You just quite never know, but that's the fun part of building teams, is you get to see leadership grow and develop. And thankfully, in this time and era where player movement is at a premium, you've got more on-court time before the old days when you didn't take the court till October 15th. You get time in June and July to kind of get to learn one another, and hopefully Carolina can benefit from that in more ways than one this upcoming season. Let's get to the non-conference schedule. As we mentioned, that was released to us on Friday morning. I kind of broke it down month by month. We'll start with October. And there's two things to talk about. As has been tradition for as long as I've been around, Carolina will always host the exhibition against a small in-state school. That'll come on October 29th against Winston-Salem State. That's the school that produced Stephen A. Smith. So that's interesting. What was not listed was the BYU exhibition, which has been confirmed and reported by Inside Carolina, Tar Heel Illustrated. I believe even Carolina basketball made it known that they had agreed to scrimmage the Cougars. There's not been a date, though, for that scrimmage just yet. I believe last year when they went to Memphis, it was in October 15th, the 20th range. I think that's where you could expect that scrimmage to fall once again this year. But that was not made public with Carolina's schedule when they released it on Friday, along with there was no dates for whatever they're going to call live action, whatever basketball event they're going to hold at the Smith Center to kick off the start of the basketball campaign. Now let's get into the actual schedule. Carolina starts November off with 5 straight games at home against Central Arkansas, Kansas, Radford, North Carolina Central, and Navy. Of course, the game that stands out the most is that home date with Kansas. That's the return game of the home and home with the Jayhawks. That'll be the first Friday of the year. So kind of like last year, that was the first week of the season, that first Friday for Carolina. This game comes the first week of the year for Carolina once again, albeit this game being in Chapel Hill. And then there's only 2 more games the rest of the month. Both come on neutral sites when they go to Fort Myers for the annual Fort Myers tip-off. That's where they'll face St. Bonaventure and Michigan State. The Bonnies, a quality program in the A-10. And then, of course, Michigan State, a perennial contender in the Big Ten, made a deep run in the NCAA tournament a year ago and also beat Carolina last year in the Maui Invitational. When you look at November, outside of Kansas, does anything stand out? Does anything catch your attention for the first 7 games Carolina will play in 2025, 2026?
Well, I mean, Michigan State still catches your attention. I mean, that's a team that last year was a 2 seed in the NCAA tournament. You look at them as a legitimate threat year in and year out, and especially if they are going to continue to play the way that they did in this past season under Tom Izzo. And I'm going to tell you, I think that those teams are going to be competitive the next few years just because you never really know when Tom Izzo is going to step away. So who knows? It could be this year. We thought that last year's crew might have been his final one, but that's always a team that is going to be pretty well stacked in terms of the guys on the roster. Do I think that means that they're going to necessarily beat Carolina or be competitive enough to where Carolina won't be able to, where I would say they would be favored? No, I don't know about that. I think this is probably going to be a pretty evenly matched game between these two sides. But I do think that one sticks out as one that's notable. And then Kansas, I mean, you look at Kansas is not the same team that they've been for, the last however many years we've had that we've struggled against them. Really since Roy Williams got to Chapel Hill, Kansas has really owned Carolina. But the thing is that you look at what Kansas has done these last few years, it's very similar to Carolina, where a lot of fans are starting to get frustrated with the way that a lot of these seasons are finishing up. These are teams that are not necessarily amongst the best in the country. They're more towards the middle of the country. And they've had some times where they've entered the NCAA tournament, and most people believe that they're going to be out in the first weekend, if not the first game. And so I think for them, you would expect that they are going to be a very talented team yet again. They've had a lot of talent on these rosters, but things just haven't necessarily worked out. So this is another game that I don't think is impossible for Carolina to come away with a victory, especially with this one being at home. So, I mean, even the 2 toughest matchups, I think they will provide tests for Carolina, which is what we like. But I do think that they are both games that Carolina should go in feeling like they have a good chance to win both of those.
The thing about the Kansas game, we were kind of talking about this just off the rip on Friday. One was deciding, okay, is that a game we want to attend as fans and maybe pay the extra a penny to go see that game? Or do we want to do do we want to do the media thing and be able to kind of cover the game, be in the pressers and all that? But I thought you brought up a great point, and especially with the fact that NC State doesn't visit Chapel Hill this year at all. That'll be the second game of the year, and that'll be the second best environment in the Smith Center all year long. Yeah. That'll be right behind the Duke game. Remember what it looked like last year when Carolina went to Lawrence, and we know what Allen Fieldhouse is, how magical it is. It's a It's a basketball haven. It's one of the destination spots basketball junkies want to go catch a game at. And for all the great games and all the legendary moments that gym had hosted, it still was different because Carolina was there. And, depending on who you ask, those are the two best programs in college basketball. Some people go Carolina, Kansas. Some people go Carolina, Kentucky. But, no matter what, Carolina's involved in that discussion. We get the return game back in our side now. And I just think from a spectacle standpoint, what's that going to look like? First off, it's a major win for college basketball. It's a major win for the sport that, at a time of the year where we're all locked in on college football and the NFL, you're going to have a game that even the casuals will see. Carolina and Kansas are playing. Oh, it's a Friday night at 9 o'clock. I'm going to check in. I'm going to lock in, and I'm going to watch that basketball game. So I think that's going to be interesting. And then you're right. Bill Self has the 2022 national title, where, of course, Kansas was able to complete the comeback against Carolina in the second half. That program has underwhelmed in a very large way since then. Mm-hmm. To the point where 2 years ago there was the report where Bill Self had thought about an exit strategy to get out of Lawrence and return to his alma mater and go back to Oklahoma State. So I think it's a good schedule for a team that's going to be breaking in 9 new faces. But you're going to have games of magnitude, games of importance, and games that will allow you to learn a lot about yourselves in the opening month of the season. Now you get to December, and December looks a little bit different than what you saw from Carolina's schedule a year ago. They'll start off at Kentucky in the ACC SEC Challenge. Love when that game is, on campus. That's the only road game for Carolina, true road game that they'll play in the non-conference portion of the season. They'll follow that up with home dates against Georgetown, USC Upstate, East Tennessee State University, before they go to Atlanta to take on The Ohio State in the CBS Sports Classic, before rounding out non-conference competition at home against ECU 3 days before Christmas. When you look at December, what stands out to you? No Jumpman Invitational anymore. That was a 3-year deal that did not get renewed. It ultimately opened the door for Carolina to either schedule another big-time opponent, which maybe you could say they did against Georgetown. But nonetheless, December does not look as daunting this year as it did last year for Carolina.
Well, there you go. I mean, that's the point that I was going to make right there, is that this is just a completely different type of December for Carolina, where in the past, this has really been where we've said you're going to learn what this team is. And I think there's still a chance that you are going to learn what exactly this team is by this stretch. I mean, keep in mind that you do have to play Michigan State and Kentucky back-to-back. It is a road game at Kentucky, so that game in Rupp is going to be tough. Even with Georgetown being a home game there and not necessarily being great, I mean, those are 3 straight games that you have to play right there. So, I mean, yeah, I don't think it's nearly as tough as we've seen in the past for Carolina. I think for this year's team, you need it. Moving forward, there are going to be other years where I believe that Carolina will need to be tested, because I think that they are going to have rosters that are going to be worthy of being tested by one of the toughest schedules in the country. Not saying that this year's roster is bad, but I do think that there are a lot of question marks with this year's roster. There are a lot of unknowns with this year's roster. And so having this type of schedule, I think, is an advantage for Carolina. I'd love to win at Kentucky. I think that's probably, if I'm being honest with you, that's probably the toughest game that Carolina has on their schedule. Before, of course, they get into conference play and take on a team that I think is going to be really good once again in Duke. But I do think that Kentucky is probably that toughest test, especially having to go on the road. This is what sucks about last year not being able to get Alabama at home, is that you knew this meant this year Carolina was going to be on the road. You're taking on a team that's got plenty of talent on it. I think is coached really well by a guy that Doesn't get enough credit for how good of a coach he is. Didn't get enough credit for the job that he did in year one in Mark Pope. But, other than that, I mean, really, Georgetown is a game that, yes, historically, it makes a lot of sense why there would be some hype around that game. Georgetown and Ed Cooley's a heck of a coach. And we know that from his time at Providence. I still think it's going to take time for Georgetown to be able to get back to a team that can make the NCAA tournament consistently. And I don't know if this year is necessarily that year. And then Ohio State's going to be a team that's going to be on the bubble. So for Carolina, you would like them to prove that they are better than that and that they are not a team that is necessarily going to be on the bubble. Does that mean that if it's a close game that Carolina is a bubble team? I don't think that's necessarily the case, but that's one of those games that you want to be able to go in and take care of. So, not the typical gauntlet that you see in the month of December, but definitely some interesting matchups that stick out.
Yeah, when you see at Kentucky, that gets me excited because that's how that game should be. And I understand that you've got the CBS Sports Classic, and for a TV perspective, when those two teams play, it matters, and guys tune in and watch. I love when that game's on campus. Some of the best environments we've seen in Rupp, some of the best environments we've seen in the Smith Center have come when those two teams play on campus because it's a rivalry.
Mm-hmm.
When you just look at the fact that they used to be in the same conference many, many moons ago, when you look at why Adolph Rupp refused to visit Chapel Hill when Dean Smith was establishing Carolina basketball as a premier program in the late 60s and into the early 1970s, that kind of adds a little bit of hatred to it. Then you look at just how many great players and coaches have come through both programs. It always means a little bit more when it's on someone's campus. And so I get really excited about that one. I'm going to be interested in the Georgetown game just from like the coverage of it, right? Because, obviously, if you're not aware, that's the team that Carolina beat to get Coach Smith his first national championship. That's when Michael Jordan went from Mike Jordan to Michael Jordan because he hit a jumper with 17 seconds to go to give Carolina the lead and then go on to win the national title. And look, we knew that Coach Smith and Coach Thompson, when they were building their programs and were national title contenders, were lifelong best friends. Of course, those guys are no longer with us, but regardless, there's a lot of history between Carolina and Georgetown. And so I hope that, there's a nostalgia feel that goes into the way that game is covered, the way that game is talked about leading up to it, during the broadcast, and then hopefully after, when Carolina is hopefully celebrating a win over the Hoyas. But I do think, without the Jumpman Invitational, I thought it was going to be interesting to see what Carolina did from a scheduling standpoint. Did they go with a lesser opponent, or did they do what Duke has done and maybe scheduled a big-time opponent out of conference in, late February or late January, early February? Ultimately, Carolina opts to not do that, and they keep that all their non-conference games before Carolina gets into ACC play. But I talked about this when we were starting to get more and more schedule details throughout the off season. There will be some years that I think Hubert Davis puts together a schedule that you saw like last year.
Yep.
I don't think this is Carolina hiding from competition. He wants to play more games at home. This schedule accomplishes that with 9 games in the Smith Center. And you can understand why, after how few games they played at home a year ago. And then, of course, the financial aspect of when Carolina plays in the Smith Center, there's money to be made and money to be gained there. But I don't think this is Carolina being scared and that they don't want to compete. I know everyone is praising the schedule that Duke has put together and what John Shire has done. And congratulations to them. But let's not act like, be mindful that what they're doing this year is what Carolina did last year. And it took Duke losing their Hall of Fame head coach, arguably the best coach in the history of the sport, to actually start playing games that matter in November and December. Whereas when Hubert Davis took over, yeah, he was locked into some deals, but also went out and was still scheduling tough and challenging his team to prepare them for what was then a 20-game ACC schedule. Now it's an 18-game conference schedule. I do think Carolina will get back to that. And also, let's just be honest here. Let's be open and transparent. Hubert Davis has to win. He has to win games this year. Like, we believe he's entering a season that is do or die, that is make or break. That if he wins 25-ish plus games, he'll be on the sidelines hopefully for the next 10 to 15 years. If Carolina finds themselves on the tournament bubble, if they're the last team in the field like they were a year ago, there's a very good chance Carolina decides to move in a different direction, because at that rate, you're not meeting the standard. This schedule, I think, allows him to get some wins under his belt and figure out some things they just could not do last year because of the competition they were playing against. Like, you could not tinker with lineups. You could not tinker with rotations because you were playing top 10 opponent after top 10 opponent, and you were down 15 or 20 in the first half. Hopefully that's not the case this year. They're going to be challenged. You're going to be tested, but there are wins to be had on the schedule in a way that there weren't to be had a year ago. But that did not stop me from predicting Carolina from going undefeated in non-conference play last season. So in totality, when you look at the schedule from top to bottom, what do you like? What do you hate about the schedule as opposed to what we've seen in years past from Carolina basketball?
Well, I mean, I like that it sets up to where this team can get some breaks. This team can be at home and can really figure itself out. I do hate the fact that Carolina isn't tested a little bit more. I do think that that's something that will be really interesting come conference play. How does this work out? You play one game on the road, one true road game, the entire first 2 months of the season. So how is that going to work out when then you have to go on the road to these hectic environments and face some of these teams that you're going to face in the ACC? And we've said it. We think the ACC this year is probably going to be better than it was last year. So I do think there will be more challenges for Carolina when they get into conference play. So, I mean, yeah, I like the fact, though, that you're going to have chances to be at home and figure yourself out, because there are so many changes with this team that I just don't know ultimately what this team looks like. I think through the first 2 months of the season, I mean, I'm not saying every game we're going to see a different starting lineup, but I do think that there will be 4 or 5 different starting lineups that Carolina ends up messing with, because they're trying to figure a lot out about this roster. 9 new guys, 9 of them. That's a lot, man. You're pretty much bringing in almost an entirely new team. And even with the guys that Carolina is bringing back, 2 of them didn't even really play last year. One didn't. One was sitting out for a suspension, and the other one did play a little bit. But, I mean, he's a guy that is, you're hoping is going to be your backup center, but didn't have a ton of experience last year. So this team just needs these games where maybe the pressure is off of them just a little bit. Maybe when, you are going to struggle in certain games, and Carolina's struggling in a game against Radford or, Navy or something like that early in the game, and you're saying to yourself, man, this is a little concerning. They can get themselves back on track in those games because they're facing a little bit of easier competition. I think they're still going to be tested at times. But again, my thing is just how much are they going to be tested this year, because they are playing Kansas at home. They are playing Michigan State and Ohio State in neutral sites, and the only true road game is going to be at Kentucky. So it'll be interesting to see how this really helps them when they get into conference play. It could mean that this team is just so confident in itself that it doesn't really matter where the games are at. They find ways to come out and play incredibly well. Or it could mean that Carolina is going to be adjusting early in conference play to having to play on the road with this team. So we'll see ultimately what happens. But, this is the schedule that Carolina has in front of it. And I think it's one that should lend to more wins than it did a year ago in the non-conference, which is something that Carolina fans should definitely be able to get behind.
I think the legitimate gripe and complaint is the one true road game. And how does that prepare you for life on the road in the ACC? Here's Carolina's road games, though, in conference play. Traditionally, they got the game at Duke, at Syracuse, at Cal, at Stanford, at SMU, at Miami, at Georgia Tech, at NC State, at Virginia. Whereas, you get a school like Louisville that's going to be, maybe the second best team in the conference. Like, they're going to be coming to your gym. Pittsburgh, a school that has been hard for you to go on the road and win at. You don't got to go play them on the road. You get Clemson at home, whereas when you go to their place, it's not so much of a guarantee you come away with a win. I don't know if that plays a factor in it at all, but I do think that this isn't the toughest road slate that Carolina has faced in ACC play before. I mean, obviously the Duke game stands out as the toughest. I think the NC State game, you could argue, would be the second toughest environment they play in, just because it's the only matchup of the year, and Will Wade has showed up and done a lot of talking since he got to Raleigh, and many people think that they're going to be a team that competes for top 4 in the ACC. And we already know what that game means every single year. At SMU, if SMU is good, could be a difficult place to go play. At Georgia Tech, of course, the Jackets beat Carolina 2 years ago on their home floor, but it's not like you got to go to Duke and Louisville and State. You do got some of those games at home against programs that have provided with you tough road tests. So, but I don't think, as I mentioned, I'll reiterate, I don't think this will be the norm every year. I do think next year Carolina will be mindful of going to find another school to play on the road. They do go to Georgetown next year. I would imagine there'd be another road game for the ACC SEC Challenge after 2 home games to start that event. So that, to me, is probably the most legitimate gripe you could have about the non-con schedule. I do think it does make a little bit of sense when you factor in that Carolina's road slate and conference play isn't as daunting as it is on a year-in, year-out basis. Now let's do the thing that's really hard to do in college basketball, which is do a little preseason prediction win total for the non-conference slate, because it's important to remember as we sit here on June 29th, these rosters are not finalized. You can still add to your roster as long as that player is enrolled by the time that classes start in the fall. You can look to add to your roster. So these teams are not yet fully complete. Even Carolina is looking to add to the roster if it makes sense. When you look at Carolina's non-conference schedule, if you had to give a early win total for what they'll do in November and December, what number sticks out to you right now?
I would say 11-2. I think that's probably where you're hoping that you're going to be. I would assume that most fans, if they're being realistic with themselves, will say that they will lose the game at Kentucky. I find it hard to believe that Carolina is going to go in there and come away with a victory, because I think Kentucky is going to be a really good basketball team this year. Not that Carolina isn't, but I believe that Kentucky is going to be one of the best teams in the SEC, if not the best team in the SEC. And I think where that game is at on the schedule, the fact that Carolina will be going on its first true road test, I think that you probably give Kentucky the edge there. And then to me, it's one of the 2 games, either the game at home against Kansas or the neutral site game against Michigan State. Those are the ones that I think you probably see Carolina maybe losing one of those, going 1-1 between those 2. And you probably still be satisfied. I don't think that Ohio State is a game that's a negotiable one for you to lose. I think that's one you should win. There's no question in my mind. And then Georgetown, that's another one that you should win. That game, especially with it being at home, there should be no excuse for Carolina to lose that game. I feel confident, and if I had to say right now, I think Michigan State is going to be a better team than Kansas. I believe that Kansas would be the game that Carolina would win at home. I'd have them starting 5-0. Going to the Fort Myers Tip-Off Classic and getting to 6-0 against St. Bonaventure, but then falling 2 straight to Michigan State and Kentucky before they get themselves back on track and finish with an 11-2 non-conference record.
Yeah, best case scenario, I mean, obviously would be 13-0. That's not realistic. If Carolina goes 11-2 and they've got a home win over Kansas to go along with the losses to Michigan State on a neutral floor and a road loss at Kentucky, I find it hard-pressed to be upset with what this team would have done in the non-conference. Like, I think we would enter ACC play really encouraged about where that team could wind up in the ACC. And look, I'm a guy that demands ACC regular season title, Final Four when you get to the tournament. Kind of said, hey, this year with what, with where the roster is at and off the court stuff with Hubert Davis's job security, as long as Carolina's top 4 in the ACC, they're a solid seed in the NCAA tournament, and they get to at least the second round, at worst the second weekend. You would take that this year as a success because I think it would prove enough that you could invest in Hubert Davis being your head coach moving forward. If you go 11-2 and you've got a home win over Kansas, a home win over Georgetown, I think that would instill belief that is possible. I think if Carolina goes, let's say 9-4, and they have losses to Kansas, Michigan State, Kentucky, and Ohio State, that would basically be an inverse of where Carolina was a year ago, or a repeat of where Carolina was a year ago, where you played big-time programs and you lost to big-time programs. And remember, Carolina's scheduling in the non-con is ultimately what got them in the NCAA tournament because the schools on the bubble did not play the teams that Carolina played in the non-conference. But we also kind of lamented the fact that you got to win some of those games. And so I think, like, to me, that's the worst case scenario is you go 9-4, which is still a better win total than what you had a year ago. Carolina, I think, was 8-5 in the non-conference portion of the season. You may improve your win total, but you're basically in the same spot. Mm-hmm. And the conversation around Hubert Davis would not be a positive one. Are you in agreement with that being like the worst case scenario for Carolina, just because with the amount of mid-major programs that Carolina faces, they're going to stack up wins in a way they were not able to do a year ago?
Yeah, well, let's just lay this out here. If you lose to a mid-major program, it's completely unacceptable. I don't care what your record is. That would be an unacceptable non-conference slate. So let's just get that out of the way. And to be honest with you, Georgetown's almost in the same spot. I mean, unless this is a Georgetown team that really is just going to surprise us and come out of nowhere and be a contender in the Big East, there's absolutely zero excuse to lose that game. 9-4 would be pretty bad because that means that you lost to Kansas, Michigan State, Kentucky, and Ohio State. And man, I know Ohio State has had moments where they've been good, and maybe this is one of those years where they pop up there. I think the highest that I can ever remember them was as like a 4 seed. But like, no, man, that just can't happen. And that would be the worst case scenario because then, I mean, you've got a loss to an Ohio State team that we feel like is going to be on the bubble. You've got losses to Kentucky, Michigan State, and Kansas, which feel like opportunities for you. And we don't really know what Kansas is going to be. So that could be another team that is technically on the bubble or close to the bubble that you lost to. That would be the worst case scenario for Carolina. And that's one that if that happens, I'm going to tell you, the only thing that we are going to be talking about for the majority of these podcasts are going to be about Hubert Davis's job security, because that's where everybody's going to want to steer the direction of the conversation. So I'm hoping that they go 11-2. 10-3, I think, would be acceptable. I think it also depends on how it looks. Like if we're talking about, blowouts in the games against Kansas, Michigan State, and Kentucky, okay, yeah, then we're sitting down and we're still having the conversation about what exactly is this team. But as long as you're competitive, I think if you go 10-3, then it's not the end of the world. It would just feel like, once again, you'd have to get some of those wins in conference play against the teams that are in the tournament field. So even 10-3, I think, could leave you at a similar spot where you're still looking like last year to find that signature win that can actually help you get into the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, hopefully that's not what we're doing. And at 9-4, 10-3, hopefully Carolina is 11-2 because we've said it and we'll reiterate it. Whenever Carolina loses, and Carolina will lose, we will want to get on here and talk about the game, and we will do our best to talk about the game. Our audience will not want to talk about the game.
Nope.
Every time Carolina loses, it'll be a referendum on Hubert Davis's job status, which is going to be very exhausting if they have the type of season they had a year ago. So let's hope that's not the case, and this team wins at the rate that we expect and as we demand. So that's a look at Carolina's non-conference schedule. A little bit different from a year ago, but I still think it's an intriguing one and one that'll make for a lot of fun previews and recaps before we get to the ACC portion of the season. Let's turn our attention to the NBA draft that was held last week, and Drake Powell heard his name get called on Wednesday night. He was the 22nd overall draft pick by the Atlanta Hawks, who were drafting for the Brooklyn Nets, where that's eventually where he will play as a rookie for the upcoming NBA season. He was a one-and-done player for Carolina, became the 55th first-round draft pick for the Tar Heels, the 120th Tar Heel to get drafted into the NBA. And despite the first-round drought Carolina has endured here in recent years, they still have the third most first-round NBA draft picks of any college basketball program. The first, one and done, and the first round prospect that Hubert Davis has produced, and the first round draft pick for the program since Day'Ron Sharpe back in 2021, who coincidentally enough was drafted by the Brooklyn Nets as well. Hubert Davis released a statement on the draft selection saying, quote, "The Carolina basketball family is so happy and thrilled for Drake and his family. Drake was a dream to coach, and this is just the start of a long and successful NBA career. The Brooklyn Nets are getting an elite player who makes winning plays consistently on both ends of the floor, in addition to being a wonderful young man," end quote. He showed up at the Carolina basketball camp that was held in Chapel Hill over the week. Got a big hug from Hubert Davis, so kind of dispelling the notion that there was a friction in their relationship, and that Drake did not like playing for Hubert Davis, or Hubert didn't like him, and all that stuff that was being talked about by Carolina fans, and then of course NC State fans and the like. When you look at Drake going in the first round to the Brooklyn Nets, who had the most maybe interesting draft night of any team in the NBA, what do you like about his fit in Brooklyn?
Frankly, that they just don't have a lot of NBA players. And so this is a guy that's going to be able to go in and immediately contribute, you would think, or at least immediately make that roster. I mean, you look at the other guys that are on this roster. So the guys that I will give you that are NBA players are D'Angelo Russell, Cam Thomas, Cam Johnson, Nick Claxton, which, by the way, Nick Claxton, Cam Johnson, two guys that they are potentially looking at trading. So you do with that what you will. It is certainly interesting to me that those are guys that they are going to be counting on if they actually keep them on the roster. If they get rid of them, I mean, we're really talking about things opening up. Igor Demon, who was drafted in front of him, of course, that was their first pick of the night. Terrence Mann, Noah Clowney, and then Danny Wolf was another guy who was drafted that I think for sure will be on the NBA roster. Everybody else, I don't think they're guaranteed to be on the roster. And so, I mean, Drake, I think the opportunity is there. Clearly, they like something about him to draft him at 22nd. This was one that I thought for sure, based off of what we, the lack of buzz that we had really heard after, of course, he initially, created some at the NBA Combine. I thought this was a guy that was almost guaranteed to go second round. And he ends up going in the first round. He goes at 22. If I'm remembering correctly, that was their second pick of the night. So this is pretty significant for him to be drafted where he was drafted. And so I think there's a legitimate chance that he ends up making this roster. So from that perspective, it's good news because that means you're going to be on the roster. You're going to be able to be an effective player and contribute to them in some way. What sucks is I don't know how much you're going to be developed on a team that, frankly, is just going to be there to tank. They are not going to be looking to develop a lot of players. They're not going to be looking to win games. They're basically just there to try to get to the next draft to where maybe they can select an AJ Devanza or something along those lines. So I see, ultimately it's a fit for him because he gets the playing time there. You talked about, to me, how you like Jody Fernandez, and that kind of comforts me a little bit, knowing that he is going to play for a coach that is, is one of the younger guys in the league that's looking to sort of establish himself. I do kind of like that aspect of it, but ultimately we know what the Brooklyn Nets are right now. And I'm concerned that he's just going to be on a team that, frankly, isn't going to be trying to win games and develop him this season or for the next few seasons moving forward.
I think the most important thing is that had we known 2-3 months ago he was going to go 22nd overall, there wouldn't have been the reaction to him going pro that there was when he stayed in the draft. People were upset, and it was vitriol because he was not believed to be a first-round draft prospect when he put his name into the NBA draft, and then when he ultimately stayed in the NBA draft. And the most important thing about the NBA draft and going in the first and the second round is all about the contract. He gets a guaranteed contract. Whereas in the NBA, if you get drafted in the second round, that contract is not guaranteed. And so I think that's the most important thing, is that he will get, he'll still get life-changing money. And I don't think it was about the money. I just think that he thought he was ready to go to the NBA. And now he gets drafted into a situation where winning will not be the top priority. Brooklyn is a fascinating team to watch in this offseason because they've got cap space and they've got maneuverability. But who knows what they're going to try to do. But Fernandez is a coach that coaches his kids or his players hard. There is a development aspect to him as a coach because that's where the priority is right now for that organization. It's not about winning games. So it's going to be interesting to see. I would have maybe loved him on a playoff team because I think the way he plays, like he'd be a better player playing with older guys. Mm-hmm. But, this might maybe not best case scenario, but it's not as bad as it could have been. He could have gone somewhere else where there isn't the role, there isn't the opportunity for him to carve out a role as a rookie and play significant minutes. Or you could have fell to the second round and not gotten the guaranteed contract that, you covet when you go into the NBA draft process. So I'm happy for him, happy for Hubert that he can, we can now sit here and say he's put a one and done guy in the NBA. He's coached a first round NBA draft prospect. And, believe it or not, this stuff, it does matter. It does help on the recruiting trail. He can actually sell that when they're making pitches to their recruits. And so that does help. Of course, I always say it's not his job to put guys in the NBA. You and I have gone back and forth about that plenty of times over the history of the podcast, but it doesn't hurt when you're putting guys in the NBA. And hopefully Carolina can get back to doing that on a much more regular occurrence. And then RJ Davis went undrafted as was expected, but did sign an Exhibit 10 contract shortly after day 2 of the draft completed. It was about 11:45 that night when it was reported. Initially, people thought he signed a 2-way contract, and there's a distinct difference in the language in terms of what it means and what it guarantees. But he signs an Exhibit 10 contract with the Lakers. You'll get to see him in action if you're a guy that follows the NBA Summer League, which will really be the most important time for him to either latch on with the Lakers and get some sort of 2-way deal to keep him in that organization. It's basically an open tryout for the other 29 teams in the NBA. Then, of course, if it doesn't work out, probably see him switch gears and try to find somewhere overseas where he could go play. But happy for RJ. It's crazy to think that the number 2 all-time leading scorer at Carolina does not get you drafted in the NBA. But, of course, with his lack of size, we knew that was going to be the reality going in. But he lands with the historical franchise. And for two guys that aren't the biggest NBA fans in the world, let alone guys that want to watch Summer League, he does give me a reason to stay up late on a Wednesday, Thursday night and watch some summer hoops.
Yeah, I'll definitely be checking them out. Unfortunately, because they are the Lakers, they're probably going to be playing some really, really late games out there. So we are going to be staying up late to watch them. But I do think that he's an interesting player because I think there's elements of his game that fit the NBA style. He's definitely got the ability to score the basketball. We've seen that. This past year wasn't necessarily his greatest year. I thought that the previous year was the best season of his career. So we'll have to see, man. Can he turn it back on when he gets to the summer league here? I'm interested to see what role they play him in as well. Are they going to play him on ball? Are they going to play him off ball? How are they going to use him? But I think this is a great opportunity for him. I would love personally to see him land with the Knicks organization so that he could play in Westchester, be around his family and everything like that. I think that'd be really cool for him. And I think that is a possibility. We'll just have to wait and see. But regardless of where he does end up landing, we'll definitely be keeping tabs on him. Hopefully it is here in the U.S. and he can land. I mean, look, we've seen it, man. You look at how Armando Bacot's playing in the G League. Eventually he's going to find himself probably making the NBA with somebody because he's just playing that well. Hopefully it's a similar sort of thing for RJ Davis with his time in the G League.
Yeah, I would love for the Knicks organization to pick him up. Of course, you mentioned where they play up there in Westchester. Obviously, that's our favorite NBA team as well. So that would be just a fun, cool storyline to follow. Just happy he got to, not maybe the way he thought or envisioned, but he'll get to say that he got signed by an NBA team, and that's still pretty cool. And knowing RJ, the competitor that he is, he'll make the most of his opportunity down in the summer league. We got a few closing notes we'll get to before we get out of here. Running late here on a Sunday night. We appreciate all of you that have joined us live, whether on Facebook, YouTube, or over on Twitter. There is video of the alumni games that took place on campus during this week's Carolina basketball camp. Ashton and I are going to break those down a little bit more in depth later this week. Little bro was at camp, took a bunch of stats, has basically booked himself onto the podcast. I do not want to give him the airtime. I do not want to give him the platform, but he has demanded such. So we'll be back on Tuesday with a little bit further dissection of it. But Anthony actually, before we got on here, went through and watched the film. Yeah, I would be a bad host if I was not giving Tony Tanks the platform to talk about what he saw in the five videos that were released on YouTube. What stood out to you when you watched some of the highlights coming out of the alumni games between current and former Carolina basketball players?
Well, first of all, Tyler Zeller, for a guy that doesn't have much of a hairline, that dude can still play some ball. I'll tell you what, it looks like he is in the gym and working out. But when it comes to this year's guys, I mean, there were some really interesting things to take away. I thought that guard-wise, Carolina looks really good, especially Seth Trimble. I know there was somebody that was commenting on the first video that was put up, and they were complaining about the way that Seth Trimble looked, how he wasn't sharing the basketball, he was doing this, he was doing that. This is a bad look for Carolina. I thought he looked great. And I didn't think he needed to share the basketball in the attempts that he had. It wasn't like he was, throwing up these wild attempts. He pretty much made every shot that he took. And the thing is that we saw this last offseason, and now the question is, will we see this translate onto the court this year? But I really liked what I saw from him. Kyan Evans is smaller than I thought he was going to be. He definitely looks like he it has a smaller frame, looks a little shorter than I thought he was going to be. But, for the most part, mean, he was passing the ball, I thought, pretty well for most of the day. Didn't really look for a shot all that often. Only took 4 from what I could count, and did not hit a single one of those shots. So people will be concerned about that. But I didn't think it was necessarily a bad day from him when I watched him. I didn't look at him and say, oh, my God, Carolina's in trouble here. Liked what I saw from, I believe, Jaden Young, whoever wore number 1 in the scrimmage. I believe that is Jaden Young. Shot the ball pretty well. I do think that, you saw the freshman really stand out. I mean, Caleb Wilson was the best player maybe on the floor for certain periods of time during this game. I mean, Seth Trimble was that guy at times. Some of the veterans, I think, had some moments as well. But I do think that the best player on the floor at certain times was the true freshman, Caleb Wilson. And I think that's something that you should kind of pound your chest over. You should feel pretty good about that you've got a freshman that looks the part and looks like he's going to make a huge impact. I thought he rebounded better than any of the other guys that were playing down low for Carolina. And that's really saying a lot. But that was the one area that concerned me the most, was the rebounding. I thought the rebounding was pretty poor. I think that's certainly something that they're going to have to work on as a team. And it was a little disheartening because I didn't think that Henry Vasar was great in this. I thought you would see more aggression from him. I thought he would rebound the ball a lot better. Didn't see that. He was an issue in transition on defense at times, just leaving his guys and leading to open shots from the outside. And another easy basket on the interior one other time. But for the most part, I do think that you are looking for the positives more than you're looking for the negatives at this point. This team is still coming together. It's going to take a lot of time for them to mesh, to gain the chemistry that they need to be able to succeed. But when you see some of those flashes from a guy like Caleb Wilson, when you see Seth Trimble being able to score the ball almost at will, those are the things that should really encourage you and give you some hope for this upcoming season. But there's no doubt there's still areas to work on for these guys. And it'll be interesting when we see them in the, whatever scrimmage they're going to play in their showcase event that they do, whether it's, late night with Hubert or whatever they're going to call it, moving forward. I think it'll be interesting to mark the progress that you have from this scrimmage that we saw to that scrimmage.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember it's a scrimmage. And so, be more open to what looked good as opposed to what looked bad. If Caleb Wilson's the best player on the floor for Carolina this year, that's not a bad thing. Like, he's the highest. He's got the most talent of anybody on this roster. He's the most gifted player on the roster. And quite frankly, I think Hubert Davis is banking on him being that guy. So if he's what he's supposed to be as a top 10 recruit and potential lottery pick, that's not going to be a bad thing. And I think from what's been reported about Seth Trimble, there's an ownership of, this is my team. This is why I stayed here. And there's a different offensive game you're going to see from him now that RJ Davis has moved on and is now playing professional basketball right now for the LA Lakers. I'm going to go back, dissect the film, be back with Ashton on Tuesday, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in depth because I know people are probably dying to hear what we think about the state of this roster after seeing them compete against some former Carolina basketball players. One last note, we talked about this when we did the recruiting update a week ago about how Labor Day weekend is going to probably shape up to be a big basketball recruiting weekend for Carolina basketball. That took another step in the right direction when 2026 four-star point guard Darren Rippey Jr. announced he'll be on campus that weekend. So he joins five-star Tony Bryant. Those are the two guys that is a known commodity right now that'll be on campus that weekend for Labor Day weekend, which, of course, is when Carolina football will begin the Bill Belichick era Monday night under the lights against TCU on national television. We got two basketball recruits already committed to being on campus that weekend. Expect there to be more to come in the weeks to follow. So that's going to wrap up this edition of the Four Corners podcast. In the meantime, we will direct you guys to the website, That's HeelToughBlog.com. All this news and from the NBA draft, the non-conference schedule, the recruiting visits being scheduled, all that can be found at HeelToughBlog.com for basketball. Anthony's doing a great job on the football side of things. Carolina's been hot on the recruiting trail. They've landed commitments in 5 of the last 6 days, getting in the final 3s and the final 4 for some other recruits as well. And all that can be found on the website as well, HeelToughBlog.com. Your home for the latest and the best Carolina basketball, Tar Heel football coverage. As for the podcast, you guys know where to find us. Every major podcasting platform, simply search the Four Corners Podcast. We'll pop up. There, we encourage you guys to rate, review, and subscribe. That way you don't miss any editions of the show throughout the remainder of the offseason. As I mentioned, we'll be back on Tuesday for Ashton's analysis from his time at UNC basketball camp. We still have the What If series. We have not forgotten about it. I did a poor job promoting that, not knowing where we were at in the calendar, knowing that the NBA draft was right around the corner, that recruiting was going to heat up in a major way. This week, of course, is the 4th of July. Depending on how our schedules align, we might start that this week. If not, we'll start it in full earnesty after the holiday. So be on the lookout for that as well. We're going to go decade by decade, talking about the biggest what-ifs in Carolina basketball history. I'm pretty excited about that. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. That way you don't miss those episodes once we get to them later this off season. With that, guys, it is going to wrap up this edition of the show. I want to thank Anthony once again for hosting with me. I want to thank you guys for watching and listening. And as always, go Tar Heels.